Good morning, everybody. That laugh and cry, holy cow. A lot of pressure. Makes me wish I'd prepped. First of all, Izzy, thank you so much for leading us in that song. I was saying in the first service, I think you'd already left, but your composure, your good reading, your poise, I just kept thinking that I wish my parents had had a child like you. They're such good people. They deserve better. But thank you so much for helping us out. When I was a little boy, about Izzy's age actually, one of my heroes was Tarzan. Do we have anybody in the room that knows Tarzan? Anybody remember Tarzan? Yes. Okay. He was for those of you in the golden years. Anyway, Tarzan. If you know anything about Tarzan, first of all, he lived in the jungle, which I thought was amazing as a little kid. I just thought, how awesome would that be, living in the jungle? Secondly, he had this capacity. He could communicate with animals, which was fantastic. That was very cool. I love the fact that Tarzan also, this was kind of his trademark thing. He would swing through the jungle on vines. And that was, you can imagine a little 10-year-old kid. I'd get off the school bus and just think, how great would it be to maybe climb up on a vine and swing on back to the house? And that was great. And then, of course, a big part of the Tarzan brand, he also had that awesome leopard skin tanktini, which was fantastic. I love that. In fact, I remember I wanted to wear one Halloween. And my wife said, "No, you'll frighten the children." But I just thought that was a great thing. And then of course he had that classic Tarzan yell, that kind of half yodel, half primal scream, which he would do partly to communicate with the animals, and then sometimes he would do it because the leopard skin thing would get caught in the vine. And that was unpleasant, but it was so great. And what always intrigued me about Tarzan, maybe you thought something along these lines. What always intrigued me about Tarzan is when he was swinging through the jungle, there was always a vine precisely where he needed it, and it was always precisely the right length, right? Not too long, not too short, not wrapped around the tree trunk. It was just hanging loose, waiting for a jungle person to pass by and grab it on the fly. In fact, I remember one of the recurring nightmares I had as a little boy, and it's still not easy to talk about, but I just remember thinking about Tarzan, kind of going through the jungle, treetop to treetop to treetop to treetop to treetop, and then he came to a clearing, and I just imagine this blur of flesh and leopard skin, flailing and then crashing and burning to a heap on the ground, surrounded, by laughing primates, and it was a little bit discouraging. The reason I'm mentioning Tarzan this morning is because having been here several times over the last year, I'm wondering if perhaps one of the hazards of coming to a church like New Story Church is that if we're not careful, it could tend to breed what I call Tarzan Christianity. Tarzan Christianity. Here's how it works. You come on Sunday morning, and it's awesome. We have amazing music. You have great fellowship, good teaching, a cool church name, and it's easy, right, to get excited about Jesus. Services are uplifting. We feel closer to God. We sort of leave elevated in spirit. And then Monday comes, and it's back down in the jungle, same old jobs, same old routines, same old classes at school, same old hassles. And the God who felt so near and so close on Sunday now just kind of feels distant, just feels distant. But then Sunday again. And on Sunday, oh my gosh, it's amazing. Once again, back and we're lifted up, our spirits are raised, we feel closer to God, and then another Monday. and it's back down again into the jungle, and we kind of end up living out our faith from spiritual treetop to spiritual treetop. Sunday morning, men's retreat to winter camp to Easter Sunday to Christmas Eve, and we find ourselves on this endless roller coaster of inspiration and discouragement, inspiration and disappointment. And the problem with that approach to the Christian life, as Oswald Chambers pointed out, is that genuine faith, authentic faith, is what happens between the moments of inspiration. Authentic faith is what happens between the moments of inspiration. I mean, there is something obviously wonderful and beautiful and exhilarating about living with Jesus, being with Jesus. It's a blessing, an inspiration when we think about those things on Sunday morning. The problem is Sunday mornings come and go, and then it's back into the jungle. But, and this is so important, what we're going to see this morning and next Sunday morning is that living like Jesus in the real world, living with Jesus is impossible apart from Jesus abiding in us. There is a way to live and to thrive in the perils and the trials of life in the jungle. We don't need to settle for this trap of Tarzan Christianity. After all, Jesus is the Lord of the jungle. And the jungle is a part of God's good creation. And in fact, the jungle can be a place of immense beauty and awesome adventure. But the one way to make it in the jungle is to cling to the vine. Cling to the vine. So if you have a Bible this morning, I want to invite you to turn with me to John chapter 15. John chapter 15. We're going to begin reading in the very first verse. John chapter 15, beginning in verse 1. Jesus says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. Already you are clean because of the word that I've spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine. You are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away like a branch and withers, and the branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you abide in me and my words abide in your heart, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit and so prove to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I've kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. And then I want you to notice carefully these words in verse 11. These things I've spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full. That your joy may be full. How do we live out a life that survives and thrives in the jungle of everyday life? And how do we do that? Not just in the high points of inspiration and revelation, but down there in the everyday jungle of frustration and temptation. Because it's not easy, right? It is a jungle out there. There are snares, there are temptations, there are false trails that seduce us. And then, of course, if all that's not bad enough, Peter reminds us in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8, that our adversary, our enemy, Satan, is prowling around like a roaring lion seeking those he might devour. It's tough. If you've tried to live this life, you know there are times all of us deal with frustration and discouragement. It reminds me of this guy who had gone on a youth retreat, a high school retreat, and he came back and He's decided he's a high school guy. He's going to really live out his faith. He's going to take seriously Jesus. But almost immediately he confronts, back in the jungle, some of the temptations and some of the snares and some of the stuff he's faced. And he's discouraged. He just thinks God's probably going to give up on me. God's probably just going to just say, forget it. You're not cut out for this. And he just keeps getting more and more worried, more and more discouraged. Finally goes to his youth pastor, and he says, he's dealing with lust. He said, I know I shouldn't have these thoughts, but I walk down the hallway of the high school, and I see these girls, and you wouldn't believe what goes through my mind. And I know I shouldn't have these thoughts, but I do have these thoughts, and I don't blame God for getting mad at me. I'm getting mad at me. And he just gets more and more discouraged. Finally, he starts pounding on the youth pastor's desk, and he just says, God, just take away my sexual desire. And the youth pastor goes, wait a minute. He said, let me leave the room in case he misses. But there is, I think, this kind of, this sense of frustration. It's real. And Jesus' words in John chapter 15 help us to understand that the key to the transformed life, even in the midst of the jungle, is abiding in Christ. Abiding in Christ. Now, question is, what does that mean? What does that mean to abide in Christ? Because abide is one of those words, kind of archaic words that we really don't use very often, right? It sort of reminds me of the kid in English class, and he hadn't studied his vocabulary. The teacher says, okay, who in here can make a sentence with the word abide? And he wasn't sure if he was right, but he figured he'd give it a shot. And his sentence was, can I have a bite of your pie? And today, that young man is Paul Anderson. But no, it's just one of those terms. You can go weeks without using the word abide. What does that actually mean? And probably one of the best ways to understand the word abide is to think of it in the terms what a lot of us refer to as having a personal relationship with Jesus, or in language that's a little bit more familiar to the New Testament, abiding would be inviting Jesus to live his life in our hearts by faith through the presence of his Holy Spirit in us. But in simplest terms, abiding in Christ is what I like to call a first-hand faith. A first-hand faith. Let's go back to the text. Look with me at John chapter 15, verse 4. Verse 4. Jesus says, abide in me and I in you. Abide in me and I in you. First-hand faith. When I was a little boy, I used to, my family and I used to take a lot of trips together. We go camping a lot, and we do a lot of weekend trips. And whenever we'd go away for the weekend, my mom would always come into mine and my brother's bedroom to pack our bags for us. And he did this. She did this because she knew that if she didn't, we would not bring items that she felt were essential. So it'd be maybe, a 2-week trip, and we'd bring 3 pairs of underwear. And we'd bring 2 pairs back clean. And so she just figured, no, I'm going to have to pack for them, because they just won't get it right. And it wasn't a big deal. I didn't generally mind this, except that my mom packed a lot of stuff in our bags that me and my brother knew we would never wear in public. Like my mom, I don't know where she got this idea, but one thing she must have sort of thought somewhere was that one thing guys really dig is dressing identical. And yeah, it's not funny. I'm sharing some painful stuff, but basically it was like we had all, and we would never ever wear that stuff out, where anybody could see us. And then the other thing, my mom was a kindergarten teacher. She was very whimsical, playful, fun, creative. Which was great, but like I remember one time I had a pair of shorts, one of my favorite pairs of shorts, and I got a rip in the left leg in these shorts, just the muscle. And anyway, and so I gave them to Mom. I said, "Hey, Mom, could you sew these?" Well, she stitched them up, but she didn't just stitch it up. What she did on my left leg to those shorts was she sewed in big red block letters the word howdy. Like, that's going to help me make friends, Hey, guys. You can get beat up for that, you know. And so she would pack all this stuff. I knew I was never, ever going to wear it in public, but I never complained. And the reason I didn't complain is because I didn't have to carry my bag, because I was the baby of the family. So my dad carried his bag, my mom carried her bag, my big brother carried his bag, I carried my coloring book. In fact, to this day, when we travel, no, but I never complained because I didn't have to carry the bag. But there was an incident that happened somewhere around year 10 that changed everything. I was going to go away by myself to summer camp. And so I can still remember that morning, Mom comes in our bedroom and just routinely begins to throw stuff in this duffel bag and just pack it all. And just a blizzard of apparel, all with my name sewn on it. And all of a sudden, I stunned my entire family because I just stood right between the bag and my mom. And I said, no. I said, 10 years old, no, Mom, I'm not taking that stuff. And my brother just kind of gasped because this was direct defiance. And my mom was a good mom, but she was tough. I mean, she was tough. Give you an example. When she got mad at us, she didn't spank us. You know what she would do? She would comb our hair. It's still hard to talk about, but I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, she's going for the brush. There was this long, long pause, and then all of a sudden, she broke the silence by saying, okay, you can pack this bag yourself, but if you don't have something you need, it'll be your responsibility. And I'm like, holy cow. I mean, no howdy shorts. I mean, it was kind of a dumb moment, but in a way it was a defining moment. And I mentioned it this morning because you know what? All of my life, pretty much, I've been involved in youth ministry. And one of the observations I've made over the years is that what you see a lot of times in young people, and frankly, it goes right into adulthood, is that if you go to a church, a really good church, or if you grew up in a Christian home, or maybe you went to a Christian school, or you go to a Christian college, what happens is people around you as you're growing up, they kind of pack your faith bag for you, you know. They say, hey, don't forget, you're going to need this truth. Put that in your bag. Oh, remember this Bible story, this killer, put that in the bag. Hey, don't forget this doctrine, you're going to need that. Oh, remember this truth, what is it? Just shut up, put it in there. And so we pack everybody's faith bag. It's all nice, it's all great, and it's fantastic when there are other people around to help you carry it. But, and we've all seen this, some of us have lived this, there comes a time, maybe you're 15, 16 years old, maybe you're a college student for the first time, maybe you're graduating from college, but all of a sudden, that bag starts to feel kind of heavy. And you think to yourself, well, I still believe in God. Like, I totally believe in God, but I don't think you have to believe that. And like, I really love God and everything. Like, oh my gosh, God is like so important. But I don't think you have to you don't have to believe in that. Like, I love God, but I didn't sign up for that. And that doesn't really fit with kind of my lifestyle. And so we start taking stuff out of the bag so it kind of fits who we are. And by the time you graduate from high school, maybe college, kind of move into young adulthood, you still have the bag. There's only one problem. What's that? It's empty. It's empty. To put it in the words of the Apostle Paul, we sort of have the form of religion, but we lack the power thereof. One of the central truths of life with Jesus is that second-hand fellowship is a lousy substitute for first-hand fellowship. For first-hand fellowship. Jesus calls us to a first-hand faith. There needs to be that place where we sort of understand this bag, understand these truths, and embrace them for ourselves. Remember back in John chapter 1, verse 14, the very first chapter in the Gospel of John, John makes this stunning statement that the God of all universe became flesh and made his dwelling among us. Made his dwelling among us. And of course, the word there is a word that could be translated home among us or abode among us. Now, what's interesting about that is that word abode is nothing less than the noun form of the verb abide. This is the God of all universe who is living with us. He made himself flesh and is dwelling among us. I mean, it's kind of remarkable. When you read through John chapter 15, there are 27 different verses that Jesus speaks in the first person. I, me, my, mine. He does that. He does that. 27 different verses. And over the course of those 27 verses, 44 times. And remember, if you carry this actually into chapter 16, the first 4 verses of chapter 16, which most commentators say is probably a more accurate place to break the text, then you're adding up, it's actually 46 times in 27 verses Jesus speaks in the first person. And remember, that's in the Greek. And in the Greek, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but in the Greek, the person of the verb is actually included in the verb itself. In other words, they don't bother to write out the pronoun. If you actually look at the English translation, 60 different times in one chapter, Jesus makes a first person reference. Jesus is talking here about a very first-hand relationship, as firsthand and as intimate as a branch to a vine, as a branch to a vine. 7 times in this John 15 passage, we read some form of this phrase, abide in me, abide in my love. Now, that's not to deny the communal element of our faith. That's very real too. We follow Jesus as a community. We worship as a community. We serve as a community. We bless our community as a community. We give and celebrate and mourn as a community. But there has to be, for each one of us, that firsthand embrace. It's not enough to follow people who are following Jesus. Jesus said, deny yourself, take up your cross, and you follow me. Scott Peck, several years ago, wrote a wonderful book called The Road Less Traveled. It was a bestseller at the time. And he puts it like this. He says, one of our problems is that very few of us develop any distinctive personal life. Everything about us seems secondhand, even our emotions. In many cases, we have to rely on secondhand information in order to function. Like I accept the word of a physician, a scientist, a farmer on trust. I don't like to do this, but I have to because they possess vital knowledge of living of which I am ignorant. Secondhand information concerning the state of my kidneys, the effects of cholesterol, and the raising of chickens, I can live with that. But then he says this, when it comes to questions of meaning, purpose, and death, second-hand information will not do. I cannot survive on a second-hand faith and a second-hand God. There has to be a personal word, a unique confrontation if I am to come alive. You see this actually reflected even in the Apostle Paul's pastoral letters. So, for example, when he's writing to the less mature Christians in Corinth, the Las Vegas of the ancient Mideast, he understands to some extent that, of course, maybe there is sort of in them sort of a second-hand fellowship. He writes in 1 Corinthians 11:1, be imitators of me as I am an imitator of Christ. But then when he writes to the more mature church in Ephesus, he cuts right to the chase. He says in Ephesians 5, verse 1, be imitators of God. Be imitators of God. I mean, if you look at this text, just look at the text, John 15:4, Jesus uses very personal language in this passage. You abide in me, and I in you. Now, of course, that raises the more practical question of, well, how do I experience that kind of personal relationship with Jesus? How can I come to know Jesus in a first-hand way? And if we take seriously what Jesus is saying here in John chapter 15, we observe that there's at least 2 ways that we can nurture this firsthand relationship with Jesus. The first is loving the words of Jesus. And the second, very simply, is living the words of Jesus. Loving the words of Jesus and living the words of Jesus. So let's consider that first way, loving the words of Jesus. Go back to the text. Look at verse 7. Verse 7. Jesus says, you'll notice there it begins with a conditional, the word if you abide in me and my words abide in you. So there's an important connection. Jesus is pointing us to abiding faith in Jesus will always be connected with Jesus' words abiding in us. One of the ways we develop a first-hand faith is that we cultivate a love for Jesus' teaching. Because you know why? The more you love somebody, the more you want to hear their words, the more you want to know their thoughts, you want to know their plans, you desire a relationship with them. If you're here this morning, and you're between the ages of 14 to 17 years old, would you just raise your hand? Just put your hand up in the air. 14 to 17? Okay. Would you do a Tarzan yell? Just kidding. No, at 14 to 17 years old. If you're between the age of 14 to 17 years old, based on a recent study by the C.S. Mott Children's Institute of the University of Michigan, study done in 2023, the study was called Constant Companion, a Week in the Life of a Young Person's Smartphone Use. And the median amount of time you spend on your phone, if you're 14 to 17 years old in North America, is 4.5 hours a day. 4.5 hours a day. Now, the median number of times you actually pick up your phone to see if there might be a text or a message from your best friend or your BFF is actually 100 times a day. 100 times a day. Why? Because, the more you value a relationship with somebody, the more you want to hear their words. You want to hear their words. You know what? I get that. I get that because one of my favorite musicians is James Taylor. James Taylor. I've embraced him and his music in a first-hand way. And in some way, James Taylor's words abide in me. You might ask, well, why would you say that? Because I love his words. I love his songs. They've kind of been the soundtrack of my life. I know these songs. I memorize these songs. In some ways, I've internalized those songs. Sometimes I even find myself thinking about lyrics from some of his songs, almost meditating on those songs. Shower the people you love with love. Or the secret of life is enjoying the passage of time. I think about these words. I meditate on these words. Sometimes I'll catch myself even speaking them. Somebody said recently, man, can you believe how long we've had this drought? And I go, I know. I've seen fire and I've seen rain. And I've seen sunny days I thought would never end. And when I say that to my granddaughter, she just looks at me funny and says, shake it off. Shake it up. It's like these words begin to indwell us. They live in us. I understand abiding. I'm a James Taylor fan. JT's words abide in me. They are alive in me. Jesus puts it like this. John chapter 8, a little bit earlier in this gospel, verse 31, he says, if, again, conditional, if you abide in my word. And actually the word he uses there is the very same Greek word. It's a different form of the very same Greek word that's used here in chapter 15, the word meno. He says, if you continue in me or live in my word, you are truly my disciples. So if you're abiding in Jesus, living with Jesus, his words are abiding in, living in you, impacting you, transforming you. You study them, you share them, you memorize them. The psalmist puts it like this in Psalm chapter 1, verse 2. He says, his delight, the godly person's delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. This is very much what the Apostle Paul is pointing us to. In Colossians chapter 3, verse 16, he says, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. Dwell in you richly. It's one of the most basic ways that we nurture an abiding faith, a first-hand faith. We develop a love for the words of Jesus. We let the word of Christ dwell in us, abide in us. That's one way. The second way is to nurture a first-hand faith. The second mark of an abiding faith is obedience. It's obedience. It's living the words of Jesus. Living the words of Jesus. Let's go back to the text. Look at John chapter 15 now, verse 10. Again, a conditional. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love. So it's not enough just to love his words. We need to live his words. We need to live his words. Maybe over the last year when I've been here at News Story, some of you had a chance to meet my wife, Maggie. And perhaps you've heard me mention her sometimes when I preach. I love Maggie a lot. I abide with her. And because I love Maggie, I realize that talk is cheap. If I really say I really love her words, I need to be obedient. I need to take seriously with my life the implication of those words. Verse 10 basically says, look, the mark of our desire to abide is our willingness to obey. It's our willingness to please. It's our willingness to serve and obey. In other words, am I truly willing to take seriously Maggie's concerns? Am I really willing to value her dreams, to anticipate her wishes, maybe before she even asks, because that's what love really does. That's what I want to do. So Maggie says, hey, tonight's garbage night. She doesn't have to say anything else. She doesn't have to give me a command. I go out and collect the garbage and take it out the street. And she says, I think we need some more firewood. She doesn't have to ask twice. I go out, bring in a load of firewood. She says, did anybody get the mail? She doesn't have to ask me to go get the mail or cajole me. I go out and get the mail. She says, these dishes need to get done. She doesn't have to. I immediately get up, go get her rubber gloves, give them to her. Why? Because I love her, and that dishwater's not good for her hands. And that's what love does. Now, look, on most days, I don't have to work too hard at this. It's the fruit of our relationship all these years, abiding together, me and her in me. We've been married for 51 years. You begin to understand, you begin to know each other. That's the intimacy of the relationship. The more I live into her desires and wishes, the more her words actually live in me. And the more I actually am living into those desires, the more that just naturally becomes who I am. It just becomes who I am. Now, do I sometimes get it wrong? Of course I do. You know, I blow it sometimes. I remember the one time, who was to know she didn't want a new table saw? There are times when I blow. But the more I get to know her, the more our relationship deepens, the more intimately I abide with her, the more I desire to serve her, the better I know how to do it, and the more it becomes who I am. In fact, true story. Several years ago, and by this time, I think Maggie and I had already been married 20 years, so we'd been together for a long time. 20 years ago, one day, I just happened to open the car door for her. I didn't normally do this, to be honest with you. I just randomly that day opened the car door. I don't know why. I was just trying to be nice. I remember we were coming out of a Home Depot. We had returned a table saw, but I just opened the door for her, and Maggie just said, "I really love it when you do that. I really love it when you do that." For the last 31 years. I open her car door. She didn't have to ask. I do it. In fact, now it's become a habit. Literally, sometimes when I'm on the road with another guy, I'll open his car door. It's awkward when I kiss him on the cheek, but it just become who I am. It is a habit. It is a habit. What Jesus is teaching in John chapter 15, verse 10, is not some sort of obedience based on law. It's an obedience based on love. It's based on passion. In fact, in the previous chapter of the Gospel of John, John chapter 14, verse 15, Jesus says to his disciples, if you love me, you will obey my commandments. If you love me, you will obey my commandments. Now here in John chapter 15, we see the mirror image of that very same verse. He says in verse 10, if you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love. You will abide in my love. Now you might say, well, okay, Duffy, that makes sense, but here's my problem. I don't think I feel love for God the way you seem to feel love for Maggie. And maybe if I did feel that kind of love for God, I'd be more motivated to feel like I want to obey him. But I'm just not. I'm just not feeling it. And if that's where you are this morning, and trust me, all of us are there from time to time. Here's my suggestion. Act like you do feel it. Act like you do. Whether you feel it or not, act like you do. One of the most basic laws of human behavior is that you almost never feel yourself into a way of acting. You act yourself into a way of feeling. I guarantee you, most people who love running, and look at me, you can trust me on this. Most people, it's not funny, most people who love running, people who can't imagine going an entire day without just going out for a 5K jog, just for funsy onesie. Those people, that very first day they went out running, that very first mile, they weren't thinking, oh my gosh, this is amusing. You know, it was hard. They didn't like it. And if they did like it, they're nuts. But they did it. They did it. They acted themselves into a way of feeling, and now it's something they love to do. It's something. Now you might be going, well, I don't know, Duffy. that just sounds to me like fake it till you make it. Fake it till you make it. And I'd say, yeah, except if you've ever tried to develop any new habit, whether it's, workout time or study time or family time or quiet time, there's nothing fake about that. Developing a habit is all about acting, but it has nothing to do with pretending. You either do it or you don't. James K. Smith, in his excellent book, You Are What You Love, The Spiritual Power of Habit, writes, learning virtue, becoming virtuous, is more like practicing scales on the piano than learning music theory. The goal is, in a sense, for your fingers to learn the scales so that they can then play naturally, as it were. Learning here isn't just information acquisition. It's more like inscribing something into the very fiber of our being. It is crucial for us to recognize that our ultimate loves, longings, desires, and cravings are learned. And because love is a habit, our hearts are calibrated through imitating exemplars and being immersed in practices that over time index our hearts to a certain end. This means that our most fundamental orientation to the world, the longings and desires that orient us towards some version of the good life, is shaped and configured by imitation and practice. This has important implications for how we approach Christian formation and discipleship. This morning, if you're not feeling it, begin to act like you do. Sometimes that's what we're compelled by love to do. As Smith puts it, you can't think your way into a new hunger. Act on what you know of God's love. Act on what you know of that he has done for us on the cross. Trust him to bring the fruit of obedience from his life into you. Here's what it comes down to this morning. If your spiritual life kind of feels like a hard slog, just a struggle in the jungle. And if you're finding that your joy as a Christian seems to be kind of limited to random spiritual treetop moments in your life, if your Christian life just seems to kind of stagger and struggle between Sundays or between youth group or between prayer group or small group or Bible study, it could very well come down to two simple questions. Do you love the words of Jesus? Do you love the words of Jesus? Because one of the sure marks of a firsthand faith in Jesus, a faith that abides, is that we love his teaching. And then secondly, are you willing to obey him? Are you willing to live the words of Jesus? The first key to beating the trap of Tarzan Christianity is to embrace Jesus with a first-hand faith. Abide in me and I in you. And you know, the part about Tarzan Christianity that's so tragic is that it wastes such an amazing opportunity. I mean, imagine a lamp that has the capacity to bring light to a place, could bring light to a community, but it's not plugged into the power source. And so there is no light. It does not shine. Imagine amazing music. Your favorite musician, James Taylor, Taylor Swift. I don't actually have any favorite songs by Taylor, but let's suppose you did. And it's playing, but you can't hear it. Why? Because the speaker is not plugged in to the source of the song. Or imagine a branch that has this astonishing capacity to bear fruit and sweetness and refreshment, but it offers nothing because it's not plugged in to the vine. Jesus said, I am the vine, you are the branches, abide in me. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. Learn to love the words of Jesus. Live his words. Nobody in this room has to settle. None of us have to settle for Tarzan Christianity. The Christian life is not about swinging from spiritual treetop to spiritual treetop to spiritual treetop. It is about joyfully, consistently, intentionally clinging to the vine.